It was supposed to be another polished night of business talk and fine dining, until chaos ripped through the velvet calm of the restaurant. 3 trained killers burst inside with one goal: to end the life of billionaire CEO William Harrington. Patrons screamed, crystal glasses shattered, and Harrington was yanked from his chair like a rag doll. For a moment, it looked certain this was going to be a massacre. But from the edge of the dining floor, a quiet figure stepped out of the shadows. She wore a simple server's uniform, blending in with the staff as she had for months. Her name was Naomi Grant, and though most thought of her as invisible, her movements told another story. In the space of 4 breathless seconds, Naomi's body moved with precision, born of long-buried training. One attacker collapsed from a strike to the chest, another dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, and the last never even had time to draw his weapon before marble floors echoed with his fall. When silence returned, all eyes turned to the woman who stood calmly in the wreckage. Her breathing barely quickened, her shirt still neatly tucked. To strangers, she looked like a waitress who had just survived a nightmare. But to William Harrington, whose life had been saved before he even understood what had happened, Naomi was something far more mysterious, someone who clearly didn't belong in the background. What no one in that room knew yet was that this night was only the beginning. Naomi had spent years trying to disappear, but fate had just thrust her back into the spotlight she swore she'd never face again. Naomi Grant slipped out of the spotlight as quickly as she had entered it. Reporters swarmed the restaurant cameras, flashing, desperate to capture the mysterious woman who had dismantled 3 men like they were amateurs. But Naomi kept her eyes down, answering the detectives with clipped military brevity. Yes, she acted alone. No, she didn't know the attackers. Yes, she was unharmed. Then she disappeared through the kitchen door before the cameras could find her face. To most, she was a ghost. But to William Harrington, seated with a bloodied lip and trembling hands, she was an enigma he couldn't let go. She had moved like someone trained at the highest level, yet she wore the uniform of a server polishing glassware in his favorite Manhattan restaurant. At home in Queens, Naomi returned to a far different world. Her 8-year-old daughter, Alyssa, waited at the kitchen table with a math book spread wide, her golden curls shining under the lamp. When Alyssa held up a tablet later that night, her eyes wide with awe, Naomi's heart nearly stopped. The viral video had already reached millions. "Mom, is this you?" the girl whispered. Naomi knelt, brushing a curl from Alyssa's cheek, and admitted the truth quietly. Yes, it was her. "But it's nothing special," Naomi said softly. "It's no different than helping Mrs. Johnson with her groceries. You just help when someone needs it." Alyssa wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, whispering, "I knew you were a superhero." Naomi held her daughter close, fighting the crack in her own chest. She had traded rifles and midnight insertions for dishwashers and homework Navy SEAL operations for bedtime stories. She thought she had buried that part of her life forever. Yet fate had dragged her into the open again, and William Harrington wasn't about to forget the woman who saved him. What Naomi didn't know was that this single night had pulled her back into a world she had sworn to leave behind, a world that wouldn't stay buried for long. 2 days later, Naomi found herself standing in the small playground behind her apartment complex, gently pushing Alyssa on a swing as autumn sunlight turned the city gold. For a fleeting moment, it was peace, the kind she had fought so hard to preserve. Then she noticed the elegant figure walking across the grass heels, sinking slightly into the dirt. Catherine Ellis, William Harrington's trusted assistant, moved with quiet precision, the kind of woman who could dissolve a crisis with a single phone call. But today, her carefully constructed composure cracked just enough for Naomi to see gratitude in her eyes. "Ms. Grant," Catherine said when she was close enough, "I wanted to thank you properly." Naomi's gaze lingered on the designer coat, the polished shoes the life so far removed from her own cramped apartment. She shook her head. "No thanks necessary, I did what anyone would do." Before Catherine could reply, Alyssa twisted on the swing, flashing a toothy smile. "I'm Alyssa, and this is my mom. She's really strong." The little girl's proud voice broke the tension, and for the first time Naomi saw Catherine's lips curve into a genuine smile. Alyssa giggled as if she had passed some kind of test only children could invent. That evening, a courier delivered an embossed envelope to Naomi's door. Inside was a formal request from Harrington Enterprises summoning her to the 43rd floor office that overlooked Manhattan. The words balanced between invitation and command, but Naomi already knew what awaited her: money, a contract, a corporate attempt to buy her silence. She stood in Harrington's office the next day, under cold glass and steel, her only good suit doing little to hide how out of place she felt. William Harrington paced his voice smooth but edged, offering 6 figures as if it were spare change. Naomi's reply was flat, steady, undeniable. "I'm not interested in your money. My daughter wants me home safe every night. That's all I want too." Catherine watched from the corner, silent, but studying Naomi with something close to recognition. For William, the rejection was unthinkable. For Naomi, it was survival. What none of them realized yet was that fate wasn't finished with any of them. The night at the restaurant had only opened the first door. Naomi thought the story was over. She had walked away from William Harrington's money, his promises, his empire of chrome and glass. She believed she could slip back into the rhythm of her nights polishing silverware, folding Alyssa's laundry, helping with spelling tests. But shadows have a way of following people who try too hard to live unnoticed. 3 weeks later, Harrington barely escaped death a second time. A sniper's bullet shattered his office window, missing him only because he had stepped away for a moment. That night his voice came raw and unguarded through Naomi's phone. "I need your help," he said. Naomi closed her eyes. She knew what this meant, trading her fragile peace for the war she had promised her daughter was behind them. "It's not about money," she said, cutting him off before he could offer it again. "If I do this, it's to end it for good, and we play by my rules." The next morning, Harrington introduced Naomi as a security consultant. It was a label polished enough for board members and investors, but it barely scratched the surface of her real role. By the end of her first day, she had uncovered 17 vulnerabilities in Harrington's schedule and personnel. Her voice was calm, detached, as if she were reading a grocery list, but Catherine Ellis noticed how her hands tapped unconsciously against the table, old instincts calculating, anticipating. It was Catherine, in fact, who became Naomi's unlikely partner. She offered insights into Harrington's stubborn routines, into the rivalries that might fuel vendettas. They spent long nights in secure rooms, sketching maps of threats and countermeasures. Naomi discovered that beneath Catherine's polished exterior lived a tactical mind sharp enough for intelligence work. And Catherine learned to read Naomi's silences, the tilt of her head that meant concern, the narrowed eyes that meant catastrophe. Meanwhile, Alyssa sensed the shift. "When is the pretty lady coming over again?" she asked one night, her small voice full of curiosity. Naomi pretended not to understand, but the truth lingered like an unspoken secret. Catherine's presence had already woven itself into their lives. When 2 men were caught planting explosives in Harrington's parking garage, Naomi recognized the pattern. Each attempt grew more desperate, more professional. She pulled Harrington aside, her voice low and uncompromising. "They won't stop. Each failure pushes them closer to the people you care about." Harrington's gaze flicked toward Catherine across the room, and in that instant Naomi saw the crack in his armor. She didn't press it. Instead, she laid out the only option she knew would end this war. "We don't wait for them anymore," she said. "We make them come to us on our ground, our terms." It was a strategy forged from years in battlefields he couldn't imagine. And for the first time, William Harrington understood this woman he had mistaken for a server wasn't just his savior, she was his last line of defense. The trap was set on a moonless night at Harrington's sprawling Westchester estate. From the outside, it looked like business as usual, a private board meeting with whispers of a new international merger. In reality, the meeting was bait carefully leaked to the same channels Naomi knew were compromised. The stage was dressed with just enough vulnerability to be believable, reduced security, predictable routines, a few blind spots that weren't blind at all. Naomi had spent days preparing the ground. She placed Alyssa safely with a trusted neighbor, hugging her daughter goodbye, with a steadiness that belied the storm inside her. Just one night, Naomi whispered, brushing Alyssa's curls, "He'll be home before you know it." Alyssa nodded, too wise for her age, and whispered back, "Be safe, Mommy." Inside the mansion, Naomi checked every angle twice, then briefed Catherine and Harrington in the study lined with first editions. No one read. Harrington paced, his nerves fraying. Catherine sat still, her knuckles white against the phone in her lap. Naomi handed Catherine a secured line and met her eyes with an intensity that stilled the air. "You stay in the safe room. You don't open that door unless I give you the code word. Not him, not anyone, me." Catherine nodded, and in a rare moment of impulsive courage, her fingers brushed Naomi's hand. "Be careful," she whispered. Naomi squeezed once before turning toward the dark corridors where violence waited. They came at 2 a.m, 7 men this time, moving like phantoms through the grounds. Their leader, Silas Kane, was no ordinary mercenary. He was a scarred ghost from Harrington's past, a former contractor turned traitor, his vendetta now personal. Naomi watched them advance through hidden monitors, then funneled them exactly where she wanted the East Wing, a labyrinth she had wired with surprises. The first 2 dropped without a sound, shadows falling into deeper shadows. The third managed a muffled shout before Naomi's arm closed around his throat, sending him into darkness. But the silence fractured when Silas realized something was wrong. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes tearing through the marble halls. Naomi moved with brutal grace, slamming doors into faces, turning staircases into weapons, wielding a decorative sword like she had trained with it all her life. But Silas was different. He fought with fury, with stakes no paycheck could buy. Their battle became a savage ballet beneath the chandelier's fractured light, each strike louder, more desperate. Naomi's ribs ached, her hand throbbed with a fracture blood seeped from a shallow knife wound. Still, she pressed on. What kept her standing wasn't vengeance, it was Alyssa's face, the promise she had made to come home. When Silas overextended with a final exhausted swing, Naomi countered with precision, born from survival. He hit the marble floor unconscious, but alive. She stood over him, chest heaving, whispering to herself, "Not since the service. Not again." Behind the safe room door, Catherine and Harrington heard the code word. And when Naomi stepped inside, battered but unbroken, Catherine's hands moved, first pressing bandages to her wounds, her eyes shimmering with gratitude, unspoken but undeniable. The war wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. And for the first time, William Harrington realized he hadn't just hired a protector, he had found someone who refused to let darkness win. By sunrise, the estate was littered with broken glass, shattered doors, and 7 unconscious mercenaries under federal custody. Naomi sat on the marble steps outside her, breathing shallow, her knuckles split. She looked less like a waitress now, and more like what she truly was, a soldier who had survived another war. William Harrington gave his statement to the agents with shaking hands. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. His own head of security had been feeding information to rivals, setting him up for slaughter. Harrington's voice cracked when he admitted it publicly at a press conference a week later. Naomi stood off to the side in a borrowed suit, deeply uncomfortable with the cameras aimed her way. She didn't want recognition. She wanted to protect Alyssa's world from this madness. When reporters pressed her, Naomi offered only the barest truth. I'm a single mother." "I did what anyone would do." She said nothing of the sleepless nights, the scars on her body, or the ghosts in her head. Catherine Ellis managed the narrative with quiet brilliance, making sure Alyssa's name never appeared in print, shielding the girl from the storm. After the dust settled, Harrington tried again, this time offering not just money, but a permanent position, head of security with a 6-figure salary, and benefits that would guarantee Alyssa's future. Naomi listened politely, then shook her head. "I'm not a corporate woman," she said. "My daughter doesn't need me in an office tower. She needs me at home." Harrington stared at her, genuinely stunned. For a man who had built empires, rejection was foreign. Yet something in her steady refusal stirred a respect he had never felt in boardrooms. In the weeks that followed, he began showing up at Alyssa's school plays, sitting awkwardly in gymnasium bleachers, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. Alyssa giggled and proudly introduced him as Uncle Will, Sartuan. Catherine's presence grew too, not with fanfare, but with quiet inevitability. She joined Naomi and Alyssa for Saturday trips to the museum, where she revealed an unexpected knowledge of dinosaurs and ancient Egypt. Alyssa absorbed her warmth like sunlight, mimicking her thoughtful pauses and graceful gestures. Naomi watched this bond grow, her heart thawing in ways she hadn't thought possible since her husband's death. For William Harrington, the lonely Titan family had once been an abstract concept, something sacrificed at the altar of success. Now he found it in a queen's apartment that smelled of spaghetti dinners, homework sprawled across the table, and the laughter of a child who believed in superheroes. The assassins were gone. The conspiracy unraveled, but what remained was more lasting than any victory in business or battle, the fragile, powerful beginnings of a family bound not by blood but by choice. Months slipped by, and for the first time in years, Naomi Grant allowed herself to breathe. The headlines faded, the threats were gone, and what remained was the simple rhythm of life she had fought so hard to preserve. Saturday pancakes stretched into lunchtime. Friday nights turned into movie marathons with Alyssa insisting both women join her on the couch. Even William Harrington, once the untouchable CEO, found himself pulled into this orbit-trading corporate dinners for birthday parties and school plays. It wasn't a fairy tale. Naomi still woke some nights drenched in sweat, the echoes of battle tugging her from sleep. Catherine still wrestled with balancing her high-profile career and this unexpected tether to something real. And Harrington still carried the weight of his empire, even as he sat at their small kitchen table, sipping tea and pretending he wasn't enjoying himself. But slowly, a new truth took shape. They were building something together. Alyssa, with the unfiltered honesty of a child, became their bridge. She invited Catherine to parent-teacher conferences, demanded Harrington attend her science fair, and made certain no one missed spaghetti night. Naomi watched her daughter blossom under this attention, saw her laugh louder, stand taller, and maybe most healing of all, saw her mimic Catherine's calm gestures, as if finally absorbing the motherly presence she'd been missing. One evening after Alyssa had drifted to sleep on the couch, Naomi stepped out onto the fire escape. The city stretched before her, neon lights flickering against the night sky. Catherine joined her holding 2 mugs of tea. For a while, neither spoke. Then Catherine's voice came softer than Naomi had ever heard it. "I miss having a family," she admitted. "For years I've been indispensable to William, but never wanted. Alyssa just wants me here. And so do you, don't you?" Naomi turned, meeting her gaze, and for the first time in years, she let the wall inside her heart crack open. "We both do," she whispered. Inside, Harrington stood in the doorway, watching them with something close to peace in his eyes. For a man who once believed power was the only currency, he now realized his truest wealth was right here, the single mother who had saved his life, the child who had saved her, and the woman who had tied them all together. Naomi didn't need the headlines or Harrington's fortune. What she needed, what she had finally found, was a place where strength wasn't measured by what you could destroy, but by what you chose to protect. And in that quiet moment, she knew this was home. 6 months later, Naomi, Catherine, and William gathered for Alyssa's 9th birthday. The apartment was crowded with laughter balloons and the smell of a homemade cake that Naomi had baked, though half burned at the edges. No one dared complain. William showed up with 3 presents wrapped by his assistant, pretending he had done the work himself, while Catherine wore jeans for the first time in Naomi's memory, laughing as she helped Alyssa untangle the ribbons. When the candles were lit, Alyssa squeezed her eyes shut and made a wish loud enough for everyone to hear. "I wish we could always be like this." The room went quiet, the adults exchanging glances over her head. In that single moment, Naomi realized that all the battles, the fear, the sleepless nights, it had all been leading here, to this fragile, ordinary magic of family. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Life isn't measured by victories in boardrooms or battles won in the shadows. It's measured in the small choices to show up, to protect, to love, especially when it's difficult. True strength isn't about what we can destroy. It's about what we choose to build and nurture. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments. What do you believe makes a family blood or choice? And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Because sometimes the reminder we need most is that we're never too broken to begin again.